We're in the book of Acts, chapter 27. Now, we'll have one more week, guys, and then we begin the book of Exodus. As we would have been in the book of Romans, but we're doing that on Sunday morning, and so we're going to pick up from Genesis that we were doing on Sunday mornings, and we're going to move that to Wednesday nights, and we'll be in the book of Exodus as we just kind of continue our study through the Bible and just really looking at what does God want to say to us in our day and in our culture, and being able to really discern the will of God. And it's incredible because, you know, one of the things you're looking at the book of Acts, is you're looking that God has established for us what the church was to look like. You got the first century church played out for you as you read Acts chapter 1. As Jesus had resurrected from the dead, and the apostles were still, you know, kind of unaware of, you know, what was going to happen next and where were they going to go next. And Jesus appears to them in Acts chapter 1 in verse 8. He says this to them. He says, "You shall receive power when the Holy Spirit has come upon you, and you shall be witnesses to me in Jerusalem, in all of Judea, and in Samaria, and to the ends of the earth." Now, as you've been going through the book of Acts, we've seen that progression take place. Paul the Apostle was fulfilling that final aspect of it, the ends of the earth. He had gone on 3 missionary journeys. He was now going to be transported to Rome. And Rome was the capital. It was the superpower. It was under Roman rule. And that's where Caesar was. And we'll see, you know, as we're finishing up the book, it's where the great persecution took place as Nero blames the Christians for burning down the city. And it becomes an incredible place of persecution that takes place there as well. But it's amazing because as you're watching this whole thing play out, one of the things you notice is that God's on the throne, that God's in control. He knew, you know, that not only was he going to give the apostles a power so that they can go out and be witnesses, not just in Jerusalem, not just in Judea, not just in Samaria, but to all of the Gentile nations as Paul was journeying all around and then now making his way to Rome. And you look at all of this and you see what Paul experienced. Great persecution himself. It's amazing because as you go read the book of 2 Corinthians, he lays out for you his ministry, and he starts to talk about all of the trials and all the tribulations that he had endured for the gospel's sake. Talks about how many times he had been beaten, how many times he was shipwrecked 3 times, and that's before we get to Acts chapter 28. And it's incredible because this whole time God had foretold that he would suffer many things. And yet God had told him that he would make his journey to Rome. Remember back when he was in jail, then to kind of go forward now, Acts chapter 20. After he had been tried in Caesarea for the first time, he had put into a jail, and Paul was bummed out. Totally bummed out. He's like, man, you know, I got arrested in Jerusalem. I got brought over to Caesarea, and here I am in the middle of a jail, and, you know, what am I going to do now? And it tells us in verse 11 of chapter 23 that following night the Lord stood by him and said to him, "Be of good cheer, Paul, for as you have testified for me in Jerusalem, so you must also bear witness at Rome." So here's the deal. He's still in that jail cell, and for 2 years plus, he's been sitting in that jail cell. And God had already told him, "Paul, you're going to Rome." And because God had already told him he was going to Rome, Paul had a confidence that no matter what was going to happen in his life, that he was going to end up in Rome, because when God says something, it's going to happen. It's a done deal. Right? And Paul had that kind of faith. He had that kind of confidence that if God's already told me I'm going to Rome, it doesn't matter what we're going to experience here. And what we're going to look at this afternoon is we're looking at Paul on a journey, and it's going to be an incredible journey. I mean, it would be great to make a movie out of this. Chapter 26. I'm sorry, chapter 27, as we pick up in chapter 27. Because what you have is Paul being transported as a slave, as a prisoner. And he's being transported as a prisoner, and he's going to be transported from the port there in Caesarea, and he's going to transport it all the way to Rome. And as he's in the middle of this whole journey, man, all kinds of craziness takes place. Watch what happens, chapter 27. And when it was decided that we should sail to Italy, they delivered Paul and some other prisoners to one named Julius, a centurion of the Augustan regiment. Now, this Julius, I believe he's a Christian by this, somewhere along the road here. Because you're going to watch his treatment of the apostle, and that he gives him great liberties as he's going along the way, because he knows that he's a man of integrity, and he's a man who had a relationship with God. And you'll see that as we're journeying through here. But he doesn't really have the confidence in him, and we'll see that. It's incredible because Julius, now a Roman centurion, that would have been a high-ranking official. He would have had at least 100 men under him. So he was someone who had worked up the ranks in the Roman army, the Roman guard. And what's incredible is that now he's been handed over from Caesarea to this one Julia, who's going to go in and he's going to transport him all the way to Rome. He's going to be responsible for him, as Julius now is going to take him from Caesarea. Watch what he says in verse 2. So entering a ship in Adramyttium, we put to sea, meaning to sail along the coast of Asia. Aristarchus and Macedonian of Thessalonica was with us. Now, Aristarchus was also a believer. And we're going to find out that not only was Aristarchus there, but so was Luke, because Luke is going to talk in the first person, or he's going to be, he's going to let us know that he was with them. Many believe that Aristarchus went and he was claiming to be Paul's slave so that he was able to travel with him so that he can minister to Paul's needs as he was going. And then Luke also tagging along. Now, Luke was a doctor. And it's incredible because Luke, was there not only, as Paul's helper, on his missionary journeys, but also there to take care of some of his medical needs, because many believe that Paul had great, eye problems, and he had all kinds of issues going on with his physical health. And so Paul is laying out here, look, I had these guys that were going with me. And then look at verse 3. And the next day we landed in Sidon, and Julius treated Paul kindly and gave him liberty to go to his friends and to receive care. So, Paul's, as a prisoner, he's going, hey, why don't you go hang out with your buddies this night? Right? And he had friends in all these different ports because he had been going on missionary journeys and sharing with all these guys and starting churches. And so Paul's, just got the incredible favor as God had his hand upon this apostle. And so Julius lets him go, and he's going and hanging out with these guys. And then it tells us here in verse 4, and then we had put to sea from there, we sailed under the shelter of Cyprus because the winds were contrary. And we had sailed over the sea, which was off of Cilicia and Pamphylia, and we came to Myra, the city of Lycia. And there the centurion found an Alexandrian ship sailing to Italy, and he put us on board, and we had sailed slowly for many days, and when we arrived with difficulty to Cnidus, the wind not permitting us to proceed, we sailed under the shelter of Crete off Salmone. And passing it with difficulty, we came to a place called Fair Haven near the city of Lasea. Now, I put a little map because I think you got all these names. You kind of go, what is he talking about? Well, check it out up on the screen there. We're going to get it pulled up. Remember, they started down here, and they're working their way through. They've kind of making their way. They're all the way at this point. They're making it all the way underneath this little island, right? And so they got a port over here. They switch boats. They come underneath the island. And so at this point, right, they had traveled hundreds of miles. By the time we're done, from Caesarea to Rome is, hundreds, 700 miles that they were going to have to travel. And it's incredible because what's happening, it's going to take them 7 months to make this journey, right? And so you just kind of put in your mind, when you and I think of, traveling that kind of a distance, you're not talking about weeks or months. And it's going to be a 7-month journey by the time it's all said and done, by the time they get over there. And God had certain things he wanted to accomplish along the way. That's what's amazing, this whole picture. Because you're going to see, man, these guys are going, all of these different routes in order to get to this particular place. Because God had a plan. And they're going to even be in a storm because God had a plan. And there was a people on an island that God cared about, and he's going to allow Paul to crash on an island in order for Paul to be able to go and minister to this people and to heal them, and then for them to hear the gospel. Incredible. You see, God's plan for your life and God's plan for my life isn't always the easy road. Sometimes he has to take you down, different paths in order to put you where he wants you to be, in order for you to be to minister to certain people. Because God knows what you need. And he knows his purposes for your life. And it's incredible. Jeremiah 29:11 says this, "For I know the thoughts that I think toward you, says the Lord, thoughts of peace and not of evil, to give you what? A future and a hope." You see, God has a plan. He had a plan for the nation of Israel. He has a plan for the life of Paul. And he's got a plan for you. And it's a matter, really, of us coming and submitting our lives and saying, God, what do you want to do with my life? As Paul did. I'll go to a jail cell if that's what you want me to do for 2 years. I'll go wherever you want me to go, because I want to be in the place that you want me to be, not in the place that I want to be. How many of us can honestly say, I want to be where God wants me? It doesn't matter what that costs. Because God's looking for us, what? To be bond servants, to be those that are surrendered, those that are going, God, you know what? Your will, not my will. We're living in crazy times. And I believe God has you in these times for such a time as this. So that you can be an impact in your family, in your friends, in your community, in your workplace. So that you can be a light where God has you. And it's Paul's, on this journey, man, all these, we're going to find there's 276 men as they're changing ships now. They're going on a big ship that came from Egypt, and they were carrying wheat into Rome. And so they're now moving from one ship to another ship. That's what he says. They went over. Now, verse 9, when they had much time had been spent, and sailing was now dangerous because the fast was already over, Paul advised them, saying, Men, I perceive this voyage will end with disaster and much loss, not only of your cargo and your ship, but also our lives. Nevertheless, the centurion was more persuaded by the helmsman and the owner of the ship than by the things spoken by Paul. Now Paul comes in to look, guys, wait a second here. We're going to go on this journey, and it's already after the fast. Now, that would have meant it was work. Now, he's talking about the trying to remember the feast day that would represent. It was it's around the tip of my head. The Day of Atonement. God, it was like, it's right there. The Day of Atonement. And the Day of Atonement would have been in October. Right? So we're now getting to the winter months. And Paul's going, look, guys, I've sailed. Paul had sailed this path already, going on his missionary journeys. He goes, man, this isn't a good time to travel. But the centurion takes the advice of the seaman and the ship owner. And so he goes, hey, we're not going to listen to you, Paul. They'll be listening to him later, though. He's going to change his mind. As he tells them, look, right now is not a good time for us to be traveling through this area, guys, let me tell you what's going to happen. We're going to lose our ship. You're going to lose your cargo, and you're even going to lose lives if you continue down this road. And then watch the verse 12. And because the harbor was not suitable to winter in, the majority advised to set sail from there also, if by any means they could reach Phoenix, a harbor of Crete opening toward the southwest and the northwest, and winter there. And all the guys says, look, man, we're in a port that has nothing. It was like, it would have been a long journey to go into town. And they said, let's try to find a port that we can party at. That's what they're saying. You know, there's nothing here. Let's find a different port. We'll go to another port, and what we'll do is we'll find a port that has a little more activity. We can at least have a little bit of fun over the winter rather than being stuck here in this little, town that has no action, right? And that's what they were thinking. So watch what happens. Verse 13 now. And when the south wind blew softly, supposing that they had obtained their desired putting out to sea, they sailed close to Crete, but not long afterwards a tempestuous headwind arose called Euroclydon. So when the ship was caught and could not head into the wind, we let her drive. And running under the shelter of an island called Claudia, we secured the skiff with difficulty. And when we had taken it on board, they used cables to undergird the ship, and fearing lest they should run aground on the citrus sands, they struck sail, and so we were driven. So they're coming around that island that we were looking at. The winds were pushing them in. And what's incredible is that, Paul had warned them, guys, you know what, let's just kind of bunker down here for a while. And they go, no, we can make it to the next port. And now they're in the middle of this typhoon. And this typhoon, man, was just wrecking them. And they literally would have to do is what they would do is they would put these little thin cables underneath the boat from one side to the other. And then if the storms got really bad, they would actually, use those to feed bigger cables to help secure the boat together. Because the waves would come crashing up against them, and the wood begin to, start to waver and start to break up. And so they went and they put these bigger cables underneath to try to keep it all together. And so they're now being just thrown away around by the wind. They had to pull the skiff. Now usually they would put the skiff and they would drag the skiff behind them, but the winds were so bad they had to try to take the skiff, and they pulled it into the boat. I mean, this was a major storm that's taking place. And as they're there, all of these things are transpiring. Paul is there just trying to tell them, hey guys, hey, this isn't a good idea, but they wanted to go for it. Then look at verse 18. Now notice what happens. And because now notice Luke, the doctor, Luke, is the one writing this, and he goes, and on the third day we threw the ship's tackle overboard with our hands. So all hands on deck, right? Here comes Luke. They're throwing all of the stuff, that they need on the boat, the sail. I mean, they're just taking all the tackle of the boat. They're throwing it overboard because what are they trying to do? They're trying to lighten the ship. And because the ship's just getting tossed around. And so they're tossing all of these things overboard, and then, taking in water. And then so as they're there, he tells us in verse 20, and when neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, and no small tempest beat on us, all hope that we would be saved was finally given up. Can you imagine being out to sea for, it wasn't just 3 days. Now he's saying it had been many more days on top of that. And you haven't seen the sun. You can't see the stars. You don't know which way you're facing. You don't know which way you're going. And you're just there, and the waves are just crashing up upon you. And you're just going, man, we're done. This is it. We're going to die. And now everyone on that ship thought they were going to die. There's been a couple times I've been on boats, man, and, it doesn't take much for seasickness to kick in. You start getting tossed around on that boat, man. You're just like, oh, man. Can you imagine for days on end? These guys are just up and down, tossed to and fro, and they're just sitting on this boat. And we're not just talking, one day. You're talking 2 days. You're not talking 3. You're talking week now. And they're at the point of despair where they're going, man, we're not going to make it out of here. And check this out. Look at verse 21. But after long abstinence from food, Paul stood in the midst of them and he said, men, you should have listened to me. I love this guy. I don't think he was trying to say, I told you so. I don't think that's where he's going with this. Because I think what he's trying to say is, look, I'm going to give you some advice right now. And you need to listen to what I'm going to say. I told you the first time my advice, you didn't take it. I'm going to tell you the second time my advice, I suggest you listen. Right? So he just want to remind them that if they would have listened, they wouldn't be in the mess they were in right now. And I think it was to remind them, or because when someone tells you, I told you so, you want to punch them. Right? I don't think that was, if you're married, you know what that's like. I told you so. Paul just stands up and he says, look, men, you should have listened to me and not have sailed from Crete and incurred this disaster and this loss. And now I urge you, check this out, take heart. For there will be no loss of life among you, but only the ship. Man, think about it. He goes, look, guys, I don't know about you. That don't even sound comforting to me. You guys aren't going to die, but the ship's going down. Right? You're in the middle of the ocean. That ship's going down. I mean, how am I staying up? Right? He goes, you guys aren't going to die, but the ship's going down. And then watch this. For there stood by me this night an angel of the God of whom I belong and whom I serve, saying, do not be afraid, Paul. You must be brought before Caesar. And indeed, God has granted you all those who sail with you. Isn't that awesome? An angel shows up that night. And an angel comes and he says, hey, Paul, don't even worry. Don't be afraid. Now, every time I read that phrase in the Bible, don't be afraid, the only reason the angel's going to say don't be afraid, only reason the Lord's going to say don't be afraid is because you're afraid. And Paul had forgot God's promise that I'm going to get you to Rome. And so the angel has to come and remind him, hey, Paul, don't forget, you're going to stand before Caesar. You're not going to die here, man. And not only that, you're not going to die here. I'm going to give you all the souls of the men who are on this boat, and they're going to be okay with you. And he's able to stand up in the middle of a crowd of 276. We'll find that a little bit further down. The 276 persons that were on the ship. And he's telling, let me tell you guys something. I told you before because God had already warned me, but I'm telling you again because an angel warned me that you're not going to die. Take heart. Don't give up. And that's a great word when you're in the middle of a storm, isn't it? Take heart. God's going to get you through this if you just trust Him. And it's an incredible, encouragement. But watch what he says there in verse 25. Therefore, take heart, men, for I believe God that it will be just as it was told me. Isn't that awesome? Faith being acted out upon. He goes, let me tell you something. You might not believe it, but I'll tell you what, I believe God. And the God I serve is able to get me through a storm, even though you may not think that you can get through this storm. They had all given up already, it told us. And God's able to get you through the storm. God's going to get you from point A to point B, if that's where He wants you. That's not even a question. And God is encouraging, Paul now, giving these words of encouragement, therefore men, reminds them that they're men. Stop being not men. Therefore, men, right? Take heart. Don't be afraid. Because I believe that God and what he told me, it's going to come to pass. Look at verse 26. However, we must run aground on a certain island. Wow. Guys, remember, they haven't seen daylight. They don't even know where they're at. And Paul's going, let me tell you what's going to happen. We're going to come up to an island, and we're going to crash there, and we're going to go aground there, and then you guys are all going to be saved. We're all going to get out of this boat alive. An angel told them this stuff. And he's now repeating what, how many guys on the boat are going, that guy's nuts? There's no way. There's going to be an island. There's nothing all around us. We're in the middle of the ocean. You know, a couple times I've been deep sea fishing. It's one of the eeriest feelings in the world is when we would drive, take off like on a Friday night, and then you would all night the captain would drive for 6 or 7 hours, and you wake up in the morning and you can't see land anywhere. And, you know, every time I'm on a boat, the first thing I'm looking is, where's the shortest swim? Right? If it goes down, which way am I going? Right? I mean, and then you're out in the middle of the ocean and you look around and there is nothing anywhere to be seen. And you're just like, okay, I wouldn't even know which way to swim. And yet they're in the middle of this whole thing. He goes, look, we're going to crash into an island. And God's already told me this stuff. And look at verse 27. Now, when the 14th night had come, as we were driven up and down the Adriatic Sea, about midnight, the sailors sensed that they were drawing near to some island. And they took soundings, and they found it to be 20 fathoms, about 120 feet deep. And when they had gone a little further, they took soundings again, and they found it to be 15 fathoms, 90 feet deep. In other words, they were going from, water that was deep to more shallow to more shallow. They knew that they were coming up upon land that was getting shallower. And they started to, take these readings. And then it says, then fearing lest we should run to the ground on the rocks, they dropped 4 anchors from the stern and prayed for day to come. I bet you were praying. Throw 4 anchors out that kind of locks them in, and they're just going, oh man, if we can only see now. When it's cloud and dark in the middle of a storm, and you're on the ocean, you can't see your hand in front of your face. And they're just going, man, if we just had at least a little bit of daylight so we can see how close we are to this island and what's going on here. And they begin to pray for daylight to come. And then, think about this. These are all a bunch of sailors. And they were all Romans and, different backgrounds, different gods, all these different Zeus and, all these different gods that they're praying to. And Paul's in there telling, let me tell you, my God, the God that spoke to me, he's going to rescue us from this. And he's the God who created the storms, and he's who created the waves, and he's the one who sustains life, and he's the one who's able to, Paul's just, there with a great confidence that his God was able to do this. Watch this. Verse 30. And as the sailors were seeking to escape from the ship, when they had let down the skiff into the sea, under pretense of putting out an anchor from the prow, Paul said to the centurion and to the soldiers, unless these men stay in the ship, you cannot be saved. And the soldiers cut away the ropes of the skiffs and let it fall off. Now, these sailors were going to jump boat. And so they were going to let down these skiffs so that they can jump on the skiffs, and then they were going to fly, go off to the island and leave these guys on the boat. And Paul goes, look, God told me that if they get off the boat, we all, everyone's going to die. And the centurion now, I think he's got a little more confidence in Paul now. Because he gets his guys and they go and they chop the ropes, and then all the skiffs, that was your ride. Drop them into the ocean. And now all their skiffs are gone. Now these guys were trying to pull a fast one. It says that, they were acting like they're throwing anchors, but they weren't throwing anchors. They were trying to jump off boat. That's against any sailor's code of ethics. You see, a sailor goes down with a ship. The people that are the guests on the ship get out first. But these guys didn't care. They'd been scared for 14 days. What do you think? Now, he warns them, right? So they cut away the ropes. Look at verse 33. And as day was about to dawn, Paul implored them all to take food, saying, today is the 14th day you have waited and continued without food and eating nothing. Therefore, I urge you, take some nourishment, for this is for your survival, since not a hair will fall from the head of any of you. I love just that he was practical too. Right? God's going to save us, but you better eat something, dude, because you're going to be swimming. He wasn't all just like, just don't worry about it. Just kind of kick back, man, and watch what God's going to float us into the land. That wasn't it at all. He was saying, you know what? Eat something. You need to get some nourishment. You've been out here for 14 days without eating. Now, you're on a boat. I've been on a boat for a couple of days at a time, and I'll tell you what, man, if you don't keep your stomach full, it's hard to get anything down. And for 14 days they hadn't eaten anything, and they were weak and they were famished, and they Paul's going, look, guys, you're gonna have to get off this boat. You're gonna have to get to that land. You better get something in your stomach. And I think it's just a real, I think God's always, looking for us to, be on a practical level as well, right? He wants you to do everything you're supposed to do, and then you trust the Lord, right? You don't just kind of sit back and go, well, God's going to give me a job, and then you don't fill out any applications. You don't go out and, knock on doors and ask to fill out, online or do whatever you got to do in order to get your foot in the door. You fill out the application, then you start praying like a madman. God wants you to do what He's asked you to do. And Paul's going, look, guys, you better eat something. And then I love this. Check this out. This is really cool. Look at verse 35. And when he had said these things, he took bread, and he gave thanks to God in the presence of them all. And when he had broken it, he began to eat. He says, hey, before we take this meal, let's pray. On the boat with a bunch of sailors. I love this boldness, man. I love, he just kind of just like, we're going to bless this food because you might die right now. So let's just pray. When people are ready to die, they're open to prayer. You know that? When you're not sure if you're going to make it another day, you wonder, they could have been saying, I don't want to pray. Don't push your religion on me. But you're going to die, pray for me. And they were open to pray. And I think you know what? Our witness should be out there. Right? I know every time, even my kids were from the time they were 1 until today, we go out to dinner, man, we say a prayer, and it's interesting to watch people around you kind of stare, and often you'll think, oh, that's really neat that you guys pray together. We'll get comments, people come up and say something, but every time we're going to eat, we pray together. Because I think, man, we're doing it for God, but you know what? The world needs to see that people still seek Him, and people are still thanking Him and still acknowledging His provisions for your life. We shouldn't be embarrassed to pray. Paul wasn't embarrassed to pray around 276 sailors. You shouldn't be embarrassed to pray around 4 or 5 people watching you. Right? I mean, it's incredible because he just stands up, he gives this incredible prayer and thanks God, and all of them are there. They're all listening. Can you imagine the centurion, the captain, the sailors that are there? You guys know how sailors talk. They had to listen to Paul pray. Look at verse 36. And they were all encouraged and also took food for themselves And in all, we were 276 persons on the ship. So when they had eaten enough, they lightened the ship and they threw out the wheat into the sea. Incredible. They ate, as much as they can eat, and then they got the rest of the wheat. Because what are they trying to do? They're trying to lighten the load. They didn't want to hit the ground. They want to get as close to the land as possible. So you want the ship to be lighter. And so now they're taking all the rest of the wheat that was there, and they're just tossing it overboard. So that they would get as close as they can to the shoreline. And so as they're there right before the sun's coming up, they can at least get a little bit of light. And I love that it says that they were all encouraged. Isn't that great? 276 of them. They were all encouraged. Because there was a man who was willing to stand up for his faith. Because of one man that was willing to stand up for his faith, the whole ship was encouraged. And they ate. And they began to acknowledge something. Guys, all it takes is one person to have the presence of God in their life, and they can encourage a whole family. They can encourage a whole workplace. They can encourage a whole community. If we just, are just acknowledging, you know what? God's going to be with us. God's going to get us through this, man. You know what? Get your eyes off your problem. Put your eyes on the Lord. That's exactly what Paul's encouraging them to do. Get your eyes off your problem, man. Put your eyes on God. He's going to take care of you. Not one soul is going to be lost here. And so they eat up. They're encouraged. They're waiting for the sun to come up. Look at verse 39. And when it was day, they did not recognize the land, but they observed a bay with the beach, unto which they planned to run the ship if possible. And they let go the anchors, they left them in the sea, meanwhile losing the rudder ropes, and they hoisted the mainsail to the wind and made for shore. But striking a place where the two seas met, they ran the ship aground, and the prow stuck fast and remained immovable, but the stern was being broken up by the violence of the waves. So they cut the anchors, and they let threw up the sail, and let's just try to jam this thing into the shore as fast as we can. And they are jamming, and all of a sudden they hit ground, and now they're stuck, and now the waves are crashing. It's incredible, the power of the ocean. How quick it can break up. Even our modern boats, metal, made out of iron and steel. Man, those boats get broken up in these kinds of storms. And here you got a wood boat, and this thing's now beginning to break up. It says in verse 41, but striking a place where two seas met, ran the ship aground. The prow struck fast, the remained immovable, but the stern was being broken up by the violence of the waves. And the soldiers' plan was to kill the prisoners, lest any of them should swim away and escape. Now, a Roman guard, if he had the responsibility of a prisoner, and if that prisoner were to escape, then he would have to pay with his own life. And so the thought was, you know what, let's just kill these guys. We know none of them escaped, and we can make it to shore, and none of us going to lose our life for this. And Paul would have been one of the prisoners. It seems as though there were other prisoners that were making their way to Rome. Many believe that they were already condemned prisoners, and they were being taken to the Colosseums to be used as bait for the animals. And what's incredible as you're watching this whole thing play out is that even these criminals are going to have an opportunity to hear the gospel. And every one of these sailors and every one of these Roman centurions, everyone who's on this boat is going to see the hand of God and the power of God. Because they knew they were dead men. There was no doubt in their mind that there was no way they were going to come out of this storm. And then Paul tells them exactly how they would come out of the storm, and exactly how he told them to come out of the storm. They come out of the storm. Do you think he's got their attention? We're going to crash into an island, and the boat's going to break up. We're going to lose everything, but every one of your lives are going to be saved. And you know, I mean, who can predict that but God? And so they're there with their, you know, probably eyes bugging out. Well, what is Paul going to say next? And then these centurion guards are going, you know what? Let's kill these prisoners so that we don't have to be responsible in case they run away. We can you know, take their heads with us, and we'll prove that they're here. Got them. And watch this. But the centurion, wanting to save Paul, kept them from their purpose and commanded that those who could swim should jump overboard first and get to land. And the rest, some on board and some on parts of the ship. And so it was that they all escaped safely to land. The centurion goes, hey, wait a second, guys. You know what? That's what we're going to do. If you can swim, get off the boats. Swim to shore. So that they would have some of the Roman guards on the shore, so that when the rest of the prisoners were swimming across, that they would be able to, you know, keep them under control. And so the centurion came up with a plan. You know, it's pretty amazing, because the guys that are swimming across, and then the other ones that couldn't swim, they're there riding on boards. You got your first surfers right there. They're surfing on into the... Look at chapter 28. We're going to take a couple more verses here. Now, when they had escaped, they then found out that the island was called Malta. And the natives showed us unusual kindness, and they kindled a fire, and they made us all welcome because of the rain that was falling, and because of the cold. Now, you know, these guys, hypothermia, right? They're in the middle of the ocean. They come to the site, and there's a tribe there. And in the old King James, it calls them the barbarians. And it was saying they didn't speak the Greek language. Anyone who didn't speak Greek was a barbarian. And so there's this tribe there, and these guys were unusually kind. Isn't that incredible? It just happened that we fall on an island, that here's a tribe that's right by the shore, and they're going to watch us crash, and then they're going to come out and they're going to pull us in. They're going to start a fire and warm us up so that no one dies. You think this isn't a God thing? You think that all of this is an accident? Guys, God is working out His purposes. And here's this whole tribe waiting on the shore. These guys come on board, right? The rain's still falling. It's still cold outside. And Paul, I love Paul. Look at verse 3. When Paul had gathered a bundle of sticks, he laid them on the fire, and a viper came out because of the heat and fastened onto his hand. Now, you know, Paul wasn't going to just sit there and, you know, do nothing. He was saying, I'm going to help. What do you want me to do? He starts picking up sticks. He's grabbing sticks, and he's grabbing sticks to put them in the fire. A viper comes out and locks onto him. This would have been a poisonous snake. And so, can you imagine everyone just watching, and this thing just dangling? Paul just kind of like, you know, get that thing off me. And pretty much it comes out like that. Watch how it goes. So when the natives saw the creature hanging from his hand, they said to one another, no doubt this man is a murderer who thought he has escaped the sea, yet justice does not allow to live. Now, they believed in karma. You know, this whole ship probably broke up just so he can die, but he didn't die, but now the snake bit him. He's going to die anyway. You know, that's vengeance. That's karma. It's all, whatever goes around comes around, right? I mean, they were just laying out this whole thing, and then I love it. I love the next verse. Watch what it says. But he shook off the creature into the fire and suffered no harm. He's kind of like, I threw it in the fire. He probably ate it after. Snake is good. Tastes like chicken. No, I'm just. He throws it into the fire. However, the natives, were expecting that he would swell up or suddenly fall down dead. But after they had looked for a long time, they saw no harm come to him. They changed their minds and they said that he was a god. Because if you survive that, you have to be a god. First he was cursed by the gods and now he's a god. Isn't that wild? I mean, just within a couple minutes time, oh, the gods got him now. He's cursed. And then the snake kind of throws off. He's still there. He's probably, Paul's probably still picking up more sticks, throw him into the fire, and they're going, this guy's going to fall over and die any second now. He doesn't. And they're going, man, this guy's a god. Who can get bit by a poisonous snake and not die? Right? I mean, something's going on here. It reminds me of when in Mark, where Mark says that you'll be able to trample upon serpents, right? They won't harm you, right? Because God had a purpose in the life of Paul. It wasn't playing, you see some of these guys back in the South where they're playing with snakes and they get bit and they die. Snake handlers. You guys, that's just dumb. I don't know how to say that. You start playing with a poisonous snake, you get bit. I mean, what are you thinking? But if you're out on a missionary trip and, you're doing what God's asked you to do, and God's able to protect you, and God's able to heal you, and God's able, there's nothing impossible for God. Right? And you go out and you don't have to fear, you don't have to walk and kind of looking around every corner, because if you're doing what God's asked you to do, God's going to take care of you. And Paul's out there just doing what God's asked him to do, and God said, you're going to Rome, and no poisonous snake was going to stop Paul getting to Rome. Because it's God's will. And if we have that kind of faith, man, you know what? Nothing can happen to you unless it's within the will of God. You are bulletproof until God's done with you. Nothing can harm until God is done with you, man, if you're walking in the will of God. And Paul's getting bit by a snake right here in the middle of this whole picture, man. These guys are tripping out. They're going, man, he's a god. And then watch this, verse 7. In that region, there was an estate of the leading citizens of the island, whose name was Publius, who received us and entertained us courteously for 3 days. Now, Publius, man, I mean, remember that guy. You're probably going to see him in heaven too. Along with the centurion, Julius. Kind of go, oh, Julius and Publius, nice to meet you guys. Right? Two incredible guys that you're going to want to talk to about this incident. So remember them. And it happened that the father of Publius lay sick of a fever and dysentery. And Paul went in to him and he prayed and he laid his hand on him and he healed him. So when this was done, the rest of those of the island who had diseases also came and were healed, and they also honored us many ways. And when we departed, they provided such things as were necessary. Isn't that incredible? Here, you think that this whole thing goes down, and they kind of come to Paul and go, hey, you didn't die with that snake bite, man. I got my dad's sick. Would you come and pray over him? And they praise over him. His dad gets healed. And then everyone on the island, man, oh, I got a toe ache. My arm hurts. Everyone's sick on the island is lining up. And what's incredible, it says that when Paul prayed for them, they were healed. What's happening, man? Guys, remember when we opened up Acts chapter 1, that God was going to give them power. And when you go to Acts chapter 2, the gifts of the Holy Spirit were now being poured out upon the disciples and the apostles. And now God was doing miracles and God was doing amazing things. And God's still the God of miracles. He's still able to heal. He's still able to handle circumstances. He's still able to get you through your storm and whatever that is. He's the God of might and power, and He's the God who's in control. And it's really whether we're going to be willing to come and say, God, I surrender my life to you, and I want you to be my Lord. You know, everyone goes, oh yeah, I believe in Jesus, but is He your Lord? Because if He's your Lord, that means that you take orders from Him. He's the one who I get instructions from. He's the one, whatever He says goes in my life. It's not about my will, it's about His will. God, what do you want to do with me? And when God finds that person that's willing to surrender his life, you see, God wants to do amazing things in that person's life. I mean, it's incredible to watch the life of Paul. But it's also incredible to watch other men of great faith, man, throughout the years that have come and gone. Think of guys like Spurgeon and Finney and Pastor Chuck and Pastor Roll. I mean, these men that I've looked up to and just watch the hand of God upon their life as they trust the Lord and they just follow God and watch God provide for them and watch God take care of them and God, meet every need. And God's still doing that. I want Him to do that in my life. I want Him to do it in your life. As we are just going, God, you know what? I'm just going to follow you. Think about it. If they would have listened to Paul in the first place, they would have never been in that mess. How many people are in messes because they won't listen to what Paul says now? If you would just listen to what the book of Ephesians and Romans and Timothy and all of these epistles that he wrote, if we would just listen to Paul, man, how much different would your life be? How many storms would you have avoided if you would have just listened to what God was trying to tell you? And God's still trying to talk to us. He's still talking to us. And just because you're in a storm doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad. Think about it. Paul was in the storm and he was in the perfect will of God. He was right where God wanted him to be. Just because there's some segments of Christianity that say, oh, if anything bad's going on in your life, you need to repent, or it's because of disbelief. Paul was the greatest man of faith I've ever seen. He's in the middle of a storm. But it could be because of a storm. Think about Jonah. Jonah got in a storm and they threw him into the fish and God spit him out there in Nineveh. He had seaweed on his head, just kind of albinoed, right, from all the acid. Because he was in disobedience to the Lord. God will, use storms to get your attention too. And sometimes God will use the storms so that He'll grow your faith. Think about the apostles. Remember when the storm came, they're in the middle of the ocean, and then the storm's coming, and then they thought it was a ghost that was walking out to them. What was God doing? He was building their faith. And Peter says, hey, Lord, say the word, and I'll walk out to you. And Peter goes, oh, yeah. He says, come, Peter. And Peter jumps out the boat, starts walking, and then he starts to look at the storm, and what happens? He begins to sink. He's trying to build their faith. Guys, we go through all kinds of storms, and some of them are because that's the will of God. He wants to get you from this point to that point, and there's people on an island that you need to minister to, and He's going to allow these things so that you can get to that island. And there's other storms that God just using them to mature you and grow you, and then there's that storm you don't want to be in is because you're in the disobedience. You're out of the will of God. Because that's the one where you get spanked. Remember it says, don't despise the chasing of the Lord, for whom the Lord loves, He chastens. And so God can spank you too in the storm. But let me tell you, man, when you're in the storm, man, this is the cool thing, is that God is always with you. And He'll never let anything happen, man, as long as you're under His authority and you're under His rule. And He's going to take you from that place and He's going to get you to your next place because God is the one who's in control. And it's just a matter, are you willing, man, to surrender your heart and your life? To make Him the Lord of your life.